I'm Anna.
And I'm Andy.
And today on the Running Channel, we're going to be running through what we think are some of the best running watches on the market at the moment.
We're not paid by any of the brands to say nice things. We've chosen the watches that we think you should consider. We're also going to try and cover some other ones that we won't go into too much detail today that you might want to think about. So please don't shout at us if we've missed some of your favourites out. In fact, let us know in the comments below if that's the case. Now, let's get stuck in. First up, the biggest watch and one of the most expensive watches that we're considering today, and that is the Coros Vertix 2. Got my notes in front of me that I'm going to refer to just so I don't get anything wrong. But ultimately, the biggest comparison for this watch would probably be the Garmin Fenix 7 or the 7X, although the Coros is slightly cheaper for a similar feature set. Definitely an outdoor watch. I mean, you can see from the aesthetic, it's not a small watch. I don't know what you'd consider that one on your wrist.
I mean, it's pretty chunky, isn't it? Let's have a look. Yeah, it's probably a bit big for me, let's be honest.
Yeah, and as part of the kind of Coros ecosystem, we should also mention some watches that we're not going to cover in loads of detail today. And that's the Apex Pro from Coros, and then the Pace 2. So that's kind of stepping down in budget through the Coros range. And actually, I reviewed a dedicated review of the Coros Pace 2 back in 2020. And interestingly, some of these watches are older. The Pace 2 I've just mentioned is also older. But Coros and a lot of the other brands are constantly updating their firmware through updates that release fairly regularly, which actually sometimes can add in some fairly significant new features to an existing watch. Now this is a big watch, and with a big watch comes incredible battery life.
So you're going to say great responsibility.
Well, that too. But even in GPS dual band mode or multi-band mode, which is one of the big features of this watch, which not all the watches here have, and that improves GPS accuracy by being able to access multiple satellites at once to essentially remove interference from tall buildings, like if you're in Manhattan or the London Marathon running through the city.
Yeah.
It has smartwatch features like receiving messages.
Yeah.
And actually the biggest thing, because it's a big watch for me, is the screen itself, which is huge and really easy to read on a run. There's lots of ways of customizing the different ways that you can view the workout features and screens during the run itself. And that's my favorite thing about this. Also, you can take advantage of the mapping features. Actually, you can link this directly to Strava or Komoot and then bring your maps in from that, which is really cool to then follow them on your run. It's the only Coros watch in their range which actually has music on the watch.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah.
Although I'm not sure if this has been updated, but to my knowledge, it doesn't support Spotify. So you do need to transfer music onto the watch itself.
Yeah.
The sleep tracking and loads of advanced features. And in fact, Coros fairly recently, within the last year or so, released their training hub, which gives you access to a whole different bunch of coaching features and ways of analysing your workouts, and maybe even working with a real coach to look at the data on the watch. One thing to mention, just if you're not familiar with Coros, they have a fairly unique scroll wheel on the side here, which is how you navigate the menus. You push it in, the screen is kind of locked by default, and hold it to unlock. And then you scroll through the menus, and you can change the way it's set up as to whether you have the watch this way up or this way up on your wrist.
Yes, I remember you did that on one of the reviews that you did. You could do that on the, was it the Pace?
Yeah, the Pace 2, you can not only say which wrist you're wearing the watch on, but actually which way up you want it, depending on which fingers you want to press the controls. Yeah.
That's really cool. I like that feature.
Good stuff. Well, what's next?
So I've been having a little play around with the Polar Pacer Pro, so the newest offering from Polar. In the Polar range, they've got the Vantage and the Polar Grit X for as sort of running outdoorsy watches. So I did a review on the Grit X on the channel a couple of years ago as well. So this is a more it's a lighter watch than a Grit X. It's lighter on the features as well, I would say. But the thing that Polar has, which I actually really quite like, is they've got their wrist-based power running metric.
Oh, interesting.
So if you love data, obviously you've got all of the usual pace and distance and heart rate and all the rest of it, but also Polar has their wrist-based power metric, which, you know, it's nice to compare.
Yeah, my understanding is power you can use instead of heart rate or kind of perceived effort to run at like a steady power.
Yeah.
You know, if you're doing a threshold run, but your heart rate is going to go up and down over hills, you can use power. I think that Coros and Garmin support power, but only if you're wearing one of their kind of clip-on dynamics pods.
Exactly, yes. And so the other thing that I actually really like about Polar and their tracking is their sleep tracking. So the sleep tracking on the Polar watch is It's really insightful, really useful. We know that sleep's very important for runners. And on the Polar Flow, which is their sort of app and web-based setup for the watch, it gives you all of your detailed insight for your sleep, but then will recommend your workouts based on your sleep score, as it were, when you wake up. So that's really nice too.
Amazing. And that, you said already talked about the aesthetic, like it's definitely a running dedicated watch as opposed to, the Suunto and a couple of the watches here have that kind of style where they look a bit more like an outdoors watch.
Yes, so it is a running sort of specific watch, but it does have multi-sport options as well. So it can support cycling and triathlon modes as well.
Yeah, and you've taken on some pretty epic challenges, running 260k over 6 days, all that sort of stuff, with some pretty extreme watches as well. Where does this fall in the kind of battery life and like that kind of thing, which is important to some people but not everybody? Yeah,
so battery life on this one, unfortunately, wasn't massively impressed with, because I did take this out on my latest Ultra and it didn't last the day.
Didn't last a day?
So, but the day of running out there was about a 12-hour day.
Okay,
because it was more hiking.
That's a pretty long day.
They were very long days. And yeah, so the Polar website says that it sort of supports 7 days from a full charge.
Yeah, and something like 35 hours of GPS mode use with the heart rate as well.
Exactly. I found that I actually probably got closer to 4 to 5 days out of it.
Yeah, and at this kind of price point, in a smaller, lighter watch, you do have to sacrifice things like battery life sometimes.
I would say that this is more aimed at, maybe if you're training for a marathon, a half marathon, that sort of maybe like a road race, that sort of thing. It's really, really lightweight, and it is really, really comfortable to wear as well. But yes, I wouldn't personally put this down as it's not an outdoor rugged kind of watch like some of the ones that we've included is.
Next up, you've been taking a look at the cheapest in terms of retail price watch on test, and this is a bit of a collaboration between Decathlon and Coros.
Yes.
So it's a bit of a hybrid. I had a little play with it, and the only thing that I found confusing was that the stop button for the first time ever in a watch is on the left-hand side.
I found it a little bit confusing with this, setting it up, because I had to download both the Decathlon app, which is Decathlon Connect, and the Coros app to get it set up and to sync with my phone. Now, I hate having apps on my phone. However, that aside, for the price point of this watch and for what it can do, I was really, really impressed. It's the cheapest we have in our roundup.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Probably in terms of retail, definitely. You could probably pick a few of these watches up, maybe the Fitbit as well, at a similar price point. But this undercuts Coros's entire range.
Yeah.
That's why they've teamed up, and it's not a fully Coros branded watch.
Yeah, and the one of the main things that I was most pleasantly surprised about with this watch is the battery life on it. So even just in standby mode, I'd been testing a few watches over the course of a few weeks, and then I'd come back to this one and it would still have charge because it had just been sat on the desk, and obviously not doing any GPS stuff. But that's what you want. If you've got 10% charge left on your watch and you're like, I just want it to hang on so I can get out for a run and then I'll charge it afterwards.
Yeah, that does happen quite a lot. You think you've been putting off going for a run, if you're me, you've been procrastinating over a couple of days, and then by the time you do it, the watch that you were going to measure it on is dead. Yeah. So I do think the battery life's a big pro here. It's also incredibly light.
Definitely.
And
yes.
I mean, I don't know what happened in the design process, but I sort of unashamedly looks like similar brands out there in terms of the design.
Yes, for sure. And again, this one supports multi-sport as well, which at this price point, I remember buying my first GPS running watch and it just did run.
Yeah, you just kind of hit go and then
you
went out.
Yeah, and if you wanted to run or if you wanted to cycle, you just still hit go. Whereas this specifically does track cycling, running, track running, pool swims as well. I've not tested it in the pool yet. Mm-hmm. But it would be interesting to see whether that, I assume that then counts your laps and stuff in the pool. So yeah, super impressed with it.
Yeah, and Kiprun's one of Decathlon's kind of sub-brands, so it's owned by Decathlon. It's what their main running brand is, alongside kind of Kalenji, Kiprun, Vertix as well, which is their trail stuff. So sometimes that can be a bit confusing because they're kind of in-house brands.
Yes. What a beautiful watch. It's got so much in it. Like for a tiny This is the S version, so small. So this is like my wrist size kind of version. And then you can get the other size one as well, which is a bit bigger. And you can get music versions or not. But it just has so much in it. It's not their beginner watch, because that would be what the Forerunner 55 is, but it's sort of the next step up from that.
Yeah, that's right. And we kind of ummed and ahed about including the 55 in this roundup. And actually, if you are new to running or looking to get your first running watch and don't want to spend on the Forerunner 255, then definitely go and take a look at the 55. This just has very recently been released and also has some really advanced features, including the things that you've mentioned already.
It's got nav, but the basic breadcrumb nav to listen to music, so you can listen to Spotify or Deezer or...
Yeah, and that's all via Bluetooth. So if you don't want any wires, you don't want to have a phone on on your arm, then the music element is what appeals to me, and actually that's why I thought we should include that, because yes, it's more expensive, but it's not as expensive as some of the much bigger watches that have music on them.
The other thing about the 255 is that, you know, I said it's packed full of all of Garmin's features. It really is. So it's got things like Pacer Pro built into it, and that was something that was only really reserved for their higher end models, but that's been brought into the Forerunner range, which I think's a really useful tool if you've got a race coming up and you want to you know, basically have a pacer on your wrist. I've used that feature in races and got PBs with it, so I genuinely think it's a great feature to have.
Yeah, the 255 also has suggested workouts from Garmin, similar to something that's offered by the Suunto 5 Peak and also by the Polar. And that's available on the 55 as well, where it will kind of tell you what to do. In fact, if you want to find out what it's like to do exactly what your watch tells you what to do, without having to think about it, then Sarah actually did that for a month, so check out that video. Yeah.
It's a watch that's aimed at people who are interested in getting lots of running data. There is so much that you can track with this watch, you know, your sleep, your stress scores, your body battery, your women's health trackings on there as well.
Yeah, I like the fact that they've introduced two sizes here as well. I would prefer the slightly bigger size myself. And then a couple of things that I like on it when I looked at it are, I was used to using my Fenix 7, which is much more expensive and has glances on the watch, so you can have a quick glance into lots of your different stats without having to deep dive into the menus or the app. And then this also, I think, is the cheapest watch, I think, that we're testing here that has multiband GNSS, which is the multi-GPS use of satellites for kind of improved accuracy.
So Andy, you've been testing out a Suunto. Which one's this one?
This one is the Suunto 5 Peak. So that was released in 2022 and sits in the middle of the Suunto 3 Peak and the Suunto 9 Peak. And yes, I know that 5's not quite in the middle of 3 and 9. Maths. And this is a mid-range smartwatch. It's actually, I think, a really beautiful watch.
It's really lovely looking.
Aesthetically. One of the nice touches here on the strap is that it doesn't have what most watches have, which is those extra straps on the second piece to kind of strap it in once you've buckled it up. It has a little little kind of clip underneath it that pops through the holes.
That's like the Apple Watch.
Yeah, so that works really nicely. I will say that the bezel and so on and design is beautiful. The screen is very small within that face. There is quite a wide black bezel there. At this price point for a mid-range watch, you actually get access to really comprehensive mapping and navigation, mainly via Suunto's app, which is nice and easy to use, which uses a combination of their kind of popular routing and heat maps, so that you can then plot a route in the app and send it to the watch.
Nice.
The navigation on the watch itself is more similar to kind of what you describe as breadcrumbs, so you're not getting really deep. The screen's just too small.
Yeah.
But you can send it very easily to your watch, so the actual making a route and sending it is very straightforward. I mentioned that the screen is slightly smaller. It's also not the brightest.
Is that it on with the backlight on? Oh right, yeah. No, it's not that bright, is it?
But saying that, weirdly, indoors, not particularly impactful, doesn't look that bright, but I didn't have any trouble reading it in really bright sunlight out. So some sort of magic going on there, I think. The battery did seem to go down a little bit more quickly than I was expecting. I didn't quite get a week out of it. It is a small, lightweight watch, so I would expect to charge it, more regularly than some of the more expensive watches with longer battery life, but they are also bigger and heavier. And the app was good, really easy to use from a navigation perspective. My personal preference would be that the Coros and the Garmin apps, Garmin Connect, etc., are easier to use and a little bit more intuitive. And actually some of the data that's displayed on this watch or in the app if you don't understand the technicalities of it, is a little bit less well explained.
Right.
But if you do know what you're looking for, or are happy to dig a bit deeper, then you can kind of find the answers that you might be looking for.
Yeah. Who would you say that watch is for? What kind of runner would enjoy that watch?
So it could be a pretty good first running watch.
Yeah.
So for someone who's making a step up and wants to leave their phone at home. If someone cares about navigating and finding new routes, then this is a nice route into that. There are similar offerings from, for example, the Garmin 255 in terms of breadcrumb navigation and using Garmin's app to plot the route. But similarly, if you're familiar with Suunto, like their kind of styling, because it does look a little bit different as well,
Yeah, it's beautiful.
then that could be the way to go. But yes, I'd say it's there are other watches on test that would cover off a very serious runner more comprehensively.
Yeah. So I have had the pleasure, a little bit, of testing the Apple Watch Series 7. So I was really excited about testing this watch because I've never tried an Apple Watch before. And I know of one runner who absolutely swears by loving their Apple Watch.
And they're a pretty serious runner as well. And interestingly, that's not normally what the perception of the Apple Watch is, right? These are pretty serious running watches, and that's probably not.
No, so what I would say is that I don't think that we could have done a best watches roundup without including the Apple Watch, because there are so many runners out there who, for them, the watch is part of your life, right? So this is more of a lifestyle watch, and it's really great if you want to use it as, you know, getting your notifications and making calls. There is so much cool tech in it.
Also Apple Health, like the fact that actually a lot of third-party apps are being built that want to pull your data from Apple Health, and this tracks you at all times. You're wearing it all the time. Like, say, a lifestyle choice. Like you actually said, I said I really like the aesthetic of some of these.
Yeah.
But you were like, well, I wouldn't wear them to work or to a wedding.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd wear the Apple Watch to a wedding. I don't know.
I mean, I don't see why not. And yeah, I think the aesthetic of it, like you say, is it's a nice looking watch. And you mentioned about all the different apps that you can use with it. And Apple also have their Fitness Plus now, so you get a free subscription when you buy the watch, and then after that you then have to pay for the subscription. But it's a bit like Peloton, so it's got guided runs on treadmills outdoors. It's got workouts that you can follow along with. There are new workouts that they release every week. And, you know, if you're a runner who, you know, would like to do some strength and conditioning and you don't know where to start, these are really great workouts for you to be able to access with your watch.
And I think that the watch, to my understanding, sends data to the TV as well with Apple Fitness. So you kind of almost, a bit like being in a really fancy fitness class where you see yourself up at the front of the wall. Like you get that interaction with it. Exactly.
One thing that I really like that Apple have done with this as well is, so this is more of like an accessibility thing. So, you know, with a lot of watches, when you go to start an activity and you're like, let's run. Well, actually what they've done on the Apple Watch is they've got a wheelchair run mode.
Oh, interesting.
So rather than, you know, just blanket saying let's run, you can access that mode and it says let's roll.
I do like when the language is adapted. I think it's how it should be, right?
Exactly, and it's so important for the accessibility and inclusion side of things, and I just think that's a really nice touch. So the Apple Watch also has heart rate wrist data, and doctors are apparently now accepting the data that comes from your Apple Watch that you can download and give them as a PDF as like an ECG reading.
Yeah, I think they're making quite a lot out of that. So yeah, definitely some caveats to kind of wrist-based ECG monitoring, but still, like, that's a positive step forward if you are monitoring your health day to day.
Yeah. So this is the Fitbit Charge 5. And again, it was one of the ones that we sort of felt that we had to include in this roundup because I think there's a time and a place for all of these different watches. Again, aesthetically to start with, it is the kind of thing that, you know, it's tiny on your wrist. It doesn't really, it doesn't cause you too much bother because it's just there.
It's unobtrusive, and it's much more similar to the how like fitness trackers have evolved, but this is much more featured than that.
What I would think of a Fitbit is it was just a step counter, just counted your steps, whereas now there are so many more features to Fitbit. And so the Fitbit Charge is completely touchscreen, which took a little while to actually get used to and figure out. And it can be a little bit frustrating at times if you've got sweaty fingers. So if you're using it for actual activity tracking, it can be a little bit fiddly. But similarly to the Apple Watch, where we were talking about the ECG, the Fitbit has like a health snapshot that you can do. So you put your fingers either side and it can pick up little electrical pulses from your fingers.
Yeah, it's just science according to Anna.
No, genuinely that's what it says. And the lower the number, the less stressed you are. So there we go.
I wonder whether that's a version of heart rate variability. But oh no, they say it's. I've got my notes here. Probably should have consulted them
probably
first.
read them.
The EDA, the electrodermal activity sensor for measuring stress responses.
Science according to Anna.
Yeah, sorry, I stand abashed.
So what we've sort of said about a lot of these watches or have asked is, who is this for? I would suggest, my mum has one of these, for example. So this is for, a casual runner who likes to go to park run every week or maybe do a little bit, on the side of that. They like to be aware of, health and fitness.
Yeah.
You want to be aware of how many steps you're doing. And we, it's not, this isn't, I'm training for something specific and I have to hit these paces and these distances and stuff, because we did find that actually GPS tracking wise, this one comes up a bit short.
Yeah, it wasn't as accurate as some of the others when we tested it. And the distinction here though is it's good to know that it has built-in GPS, so you don't need your phone.
Yes, which you did used to have to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not a dedicated running watch, but if you want an overall kind of picture of your health and something that you wear all of the time, you can dive into the data whenever you want in the Fitbit app, then it's a pretty good choice. So this is the Garmin Forerunner 955, which I actually also covered alongside the 255 in a little bit of a first look. But in terms of a little bit more detail, this is Garmin's flagship running watch. So at the top of the line, which means most expensive, it's not a cheap watch, aimed squarely at runners or triathletes who want access to everything, all the data that you could possibly have, and the additional battery life and features that come with kind of at this higher price point.
Yeah.
Interestingly, we did discuss lots of different watches that we might include today, and we've tried to mention them as many as we can, but the Garmin Fenix 7, which I've done a lot of running in, is essentially the outdoor version of this. So this is cheaper, much lighter, and so if you don't care about the slight additional battery life and the kind of the styling of the Fenix 7, then for a running dedicated watch, this has kind of more or less identical features to the Fenix 7, so could be a really good option if that was something that people are considering and they want to kind of, well,
save a bit of cash to get that one rather than the Fenix.
Yeah, exactly. But ultimately the choice is styling and a smidge of battery life. And if we talk about battery life, this is the first ever running watch, like running specific watch in the Forerunner range, that Garmin have put their solar technology in. Yeah. So that expands the battery life even further. Mm-hmm. So actually this little, around the bezel here, you can see that that's where the kind of solar harvesting happens. And the whole screen itself also accepts some energy from the sun, so it's not just the bezel on the outside. It's only available in one size, as opposed to the 255, which is two different sizes. But you can choose to have it slightly cheaper without the solar technology, or to upgrade to the solar essentially. Because it's got the solar energy and it's a bigger watch, the biggest step up between this and the 255 in particular is battery life. So there are quoted as 20 days in smartwatch mode with some activity as well, but that does assume that you're exposing it to sunlight to top it up a little bit during the day for about 3 hours. Yeah. And 49 hours in GPS mode, which is over 2 days of battery life in GPS mode. But again, that is an assumption that your sleeve's not over it, or because it's getting some sunlight during the time. One of the other big additions is navigation. So you get full map support. Again, like I said, it's very similar to the Fenix. So you can plot a route in Garmin Connect, send it to the watch, and see it as not just a breadcrumb trail, but actually physically see your position on a map and navigate streets or landmarks and so on.
Great.
You can build those routes in the watch itself as well without the phone, in fact. And I did a video all about doing just that. So if you are somewhere new, most of these watches, or a few of them at least, offer that kind of navigation features through their dedicated app. And it's an amazing way to find somewhere new to explore when you don't know where you're going. Actually, you'd never find the best trails because people have already found them before you.
Yes, it was very useful the other day when I had already set up my route on Google Maps and turned up to the place with no signal. So I was able to get GPS on my watch and navigate to where I needed to go.
Yes, and on some of the watches like the Phoenix, and I think on the 955, you can set up hotkeys to actually, like, if you press a shortcut, it'll give you your actual grid location or grid reference. So you can then navigate via a map as well. A few of the extra things, you get up ahead feature, which you can plan in your kind of waypoints on a longer run, or your water stops, or it'll tell you what hills and elevation are kind of upcoming. There's a touch screen on this, which there aren't on any of the cheaper models of Garmin.
Okay, so that's interesting.
You can choose to navigate by the kind of classic Garmin kind of 5-button layout, or by swiping the screen and tapping to see one of the glances, or to move the map around if you're like navigating.
And can you lock the touch screen?
It locks automatically by default in an activity. So if you start the activity, then it locks. But you can also, like, I think, long press these two buttons, and it will lock the touch screen, or at least you can set up a shortcut to do that. Yeah,
perfect.
And then you get things like morning report, heart rate variability, which has also been introduced in the 255. So a measure of the kind of gaps between your heartbeats. And weirdly, the more irregular that is, so the more variation there is between your heartbeats, actually the less stressed you are, which is not what I would have thought. But that's a measure of that.
The morning report's really cool as well. That's like a new Garmin thing. That you also get on the
255.
255.
It is, it's kind of an assessment of your respiration rate and all of these other things. And then, not directly related to morning report, but on the 955 you get what's called training readiness, which lets you know how kind of ready you are to take on a specific type of challenge, whatever that might be. And all of these features now feed back into Garmin's suggested workout feature, which now shows you 7 days worth rather than just a single day's. And you can train for a specific race through their what's called race widget.
That's really cool.
So pretty comprehensive amount of features on the 955.
Basically does everything but make a cup of tea.
So next up, I'm going to introduce you to a watch and a brand that I don't think you're massively familiar with, and that is the Wahoo. Yes, Wahoo ELEMNT Rival. Now this watch actually has been around for a while, but it is Wahoo's only running watch. Have you heard of Wahoo?
Wahoo, I think, are cycling.
Correct. So lots of runners might not be familiar with Wahoo, but they are really established in the cycling world, and actually, like, their ecosystem for bike computers and smart trainers and so on are actually pretty widely used across a lot of pro Tour de France level teams. So pretty serious brand. And in fact, so this is the ELEMNT Rival, which is their first foray into watches. And because they've got a background in cycling, this is kind of unashamedly focused on triathletes. But obviously if it's good for triathletes, then running is part of triathlon, so it's a running watch too. Now I've actually used a Wahoo bike computer previously, and the thing about it that was great was that it's really rugged, incredibly well built, and very intuitive to use and set up, and that's the thing that's most striking here, is very easy to set up, and also it's a lovely looking watch. Like I think, I suppose it depends on the aesthetic that you want, but this is much closer to Garmin's Phoenix or the Coros Vertix 2. It looks like an outdoor watch with this kind of more rugged bezel.
Definitely.
And it is a bit chunkier, but I quite like that, and it feels very solid for it. The screen's also beautiful. The screen's really clear. The colours and the kind of the way of navigating through the menus is pretty intuitive and very easy to read. It's also cheaper, for the styling at least, it's cheaper than Garmin's higher end triathlon watches. Like they've got the 745 and the 955. And if you're talking about similar styling, obviously the Vertix 2 is also more expensive. But this doesn't have loads of the features that those more expensive watches have. But if you're looking for a watch that's good for running, and particularly if you do other sports, and maybe have already got bike computers from Wahoo, or you're interested in kind of the transition element of triathlon, one of the cool things of this, which I can't say I've tested fully, or at all, is the seamless transition. So you don't have to press a button and it works out when you're transitioning from swim to bike to run, and it will calculate your transition times and all that sort of stuff. So that is not a selling point for me, but it may be for plenty of other people out there who want a watch that does more than one thing.
Does anyone else think that Andy ought to do a triathlon? Yes.
I can swim a little bit. If anyone's watched me take on a pro cyclist, that didn't go that well. You can also sync structured workouts, but they do have to be at the moment, I think, from Training Peaks. So,
okay.
But that does allow you kind of full reign over how you create those structured workouts, or if you're following a training plan that you've bought through Training Peaks. It's definitely a very advanced training platform.
So if your coach were to submit your run or your session to your Training Peaks, you can then pull that through to the watch?
Yeah, exactly that,
That's
which
cool.
I do think is a pretty cool feature. Obviously, Training Peaks is heavily used by cyclists and triathletes. We've been using it for our Workout of the Month series as well, so having that integration is pretty interesting, and right now there is at least one running channel plan that you can get on our Training Peaks account for free. So if you want to try it out, then that could be a way of doing that.
Yeah.
But it's unashamedly a sports-focused watch, so no maps, no music, no contactless payments, no messing about.
I like it. Does it have an app?
Yes, it does. The Wahoo ELEMNT app is incredibly easy to use.
Yeah.
So that's how you set it up, the same way as a lot of these watches.
Yeah. So there's absolutely no getting away from the fact that when you buy a running watch, it's a big investment. Like, we know that times are pretty tough at the moment, and there's a lot of money worth of watches on this table. So hopefully that's given you some kind of idea, if you are in the market of parting with some of your cash, which is best for you. I think they've all got so many brilliant merits to them. I mean, personally for me, the Kiprun, the decathlon powered by Coros, I think has an awful lot going for it in the fact that, it's budget friendly and it does an awful lot of stuff as well. I think it's a really, really good foray into the running watch market from Decathlon. And I was really pleasantly surprised with what the watch can do.
Yeah, it's definitely not a case of me telling you need to get exactly this watch. We've tried to give you a kind of overview of all of the features that are exciting. There's a few things that I was really interested in. The Apple Watch actually appeals to me because the idea of Peloton's really appealing, but actually the kit and the subscription and so on is really expensive.
Yeah.
And so being able to have something that will kind of keep me fit overall.
Yeah.
But I know that it's definitely not the watch I would choose in my kind of former career as a professional runner.
No.
It definitely wouldn't have, not having a dedicated lap button, and it wouldn't be my choice. Similarly, I love the aesthetic of the more rugged watches, so the Phoenix 7, which we haven't included today, but here the ELEMNT rival and from Wahoo, and the Vertix 2 from Coros.
Yeah, they're very you.
Thanks.
They're not very me.
And then there are other things, like I am more familiar with the Garmin ecosystem, and I do use the Garmin navigation a lot. So the screen on the Coros Vertix 2, which for navigation was incredible, and then the 955, which is very expensive. These are both very expensive watches. Yeah. But if you do want that ability to kind of ruggedly navigate any terrain when you're out in the wild, and I'm not necessarily always out in the wild on my easy 30-minute runs, but then those are two really good options as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, let's have a little honourable mention for the Fitbit as well, I think, because I know that my mum is a super fan of that. And it, it does what she needs it to do at Parkrun every week, which is track her runs and her fitness. So, yeah, I think they've all got merits, but is there one out there that you particularly like? Is there something that maybe we've talked about today that you didn't know had been released and you're really excited about finding out more about? Let us know in the comments which watch you would buy if money was no object.
Or in fact, if you're going to spend your very own money right now,
Yeah.
let us know what you're going to get, and we'll try and answer any questions that you've got. We will try and get back to you.
We'll see you next time on the Running Channel.